Hello and welcome to Motion Graphics Basic Training. This is the final tutorial where I'll be teaching you how to create this. In the last tutorial we learned how to animate our main scene, and now let's look at animating our final component, the badge. I'm Arun Gopidas and let's get started. Welcome back to the last tutorial in this series. And today we'll be looking at how to create that badge. So we would need to have our source file for the last scene that we had animated. And if in case you don't have this, I have linked a file in the description below. And I have linked the badge also. So the first thing that we need to do is open up the file that we already have made in the last tutorial. And then we'll go into a project window and double click to import our badge. So I'll go into basic training T4 and that's badges, and I'll import it as composition retain layer sizes and I'll click on open. So now I have the basic training as one of the compositions and then I have badge as another composition. So I'll just double click on this badge and this is what I have. So we'll jump right into the animation. So the first thing that I want to do is probably animate this dotted line. So that's one of the most simplest things to do. So I'll start with that. So I'll go into my dotted line circle layer and then I'll go into my effects and presets panel, which is over here. So if you don't find it here, you can go into effects and presets over here and I'll write in radial wipe. So I can just drag it and drop it on to my dotted circle. And now this effect is there on the dotted circle. So now I'll just check how this transition works. So I'll go from 100 to 0. So now you can see that it's forming that circle. So at 100, the circle is not there. And as I go into 0, the circle forms. I can do it counterclockwise as well, where it goes animates the other way. But for this tutorial, I think I'll go clockwise and I'll start at 0 seconds and I'll bring it up to 100 so that nothing's visible. And I'll press hand edge tool to move around. And I'll create a stopwatch over here. So I have my effect controls over here. If you don't find effect controls over there, you can go into window and effect controls over here. So now I'll just click on stopwatch to create a keyframe and I'll press U to see my keyframe over here. And then I'll zoom into my timeline using this bar over here. And I think I'll go till 1 second and I'll create another keyframe. So I'll make another keyframe over here and then I'll make it 0. So now my dotted line animates from 100 to 0. So that looks pretty good. So the next thing we can look at is animating the motion graphics, the top and the bottom. So for that, we'll need to first isolate our bottom motion graphics and the top motion graphics. So the top motion graphics is right over here. So I'll bring it up a little bit. And then along with the top motion graphics, I need the top circle as well. So now I'll put the top circle right above the top motion graphics. So these two are together. So now what I want to do is I want to mask motion graphics text with the circle that we had created. So if you remember, I had asked you to make these two circles and now we'll be using these circles. So now I'll just go into my top circle and unhide it for a second. And I want to make sure my center, I always know what the center of the circle is. So I'll go into this little tool over here and go to title action safe. So that'll give me a point in the center of my frame. So that is my center. So now I'll go into my top motion graphics and I'll hide my top circle and I'll see that my anchor point is currently at the top. So I want to get this anchor point to this point. So I'll click on my pan behind tool and I'll click on my anchor point and drag it down while I press shift and just drop it right on the center of my circle. Okay, so that looks good to me. And now I'll bring up the rotation parameters by pressing R on my keyboard and I'll click on the stopwatch and I'll go to 1 second where my other keyframe is as well, where the dotted circle ends, and then I'll create another keyframe here and I'll go back and I'll increase the rotation. So now you see how it travels along that line. So I think I'll have this over here. So it moves from this point till the final point. And I'll do something very similar to my bottom motion graphics as well. So I'll bring my bottom motion graphics right above the top circle and the bottom circle right above the top motion graphics. And again, I'll do the same thing. I'll go to my bottom motion graphics, go to my pan behind tool, press shift and bring the anchor point to the center. I can zoom in to be more precise and I'll just get it to right over there. Okay, and now I'll do the same thing over here as well. I'll press R on my keyboard to bring up my rotation, click on the stopwatch, go to 1 second in time, click on this keyframe, and now I'll go back to the first keyframe and now I'll rotate this the other way. So I think, yeah, that looks good. But now I want it. So right now what's happening is that all the text is visible from the beginning. So now is where we'll start using a bottom circle and the top circle, the layers which were hidden by us. And what we'll do is we'll make a mask out of this top circle. So we'll go into our top motion graphics, press F4 on the keyboard to bring up my track matte. And now I'll go into my top motion graphics and change it from none to alpha matte top circle. So now what happens is the motion graphic part which is inside the circle is only visible. So while my text moves from this position to that position, so let me hide the bottom motion graphics for a second. And now you see it begins from the starting of the circle. So whatever portion is inside the circle, only that much is visible to us. So this is the same masking procedure that we did in Illustrator, but this is how you do it in After Effects. And what we did to the top motion graphics, we'll apply the same procedure to our bottom motion graphics as well. So we'll unhide the bottom motion graphics first, then we'll go to track matte and make it alpha matte bottom circle. So it's very important that our bottom circle is the layer right above the bottom motion graphics so that it tells you, so that the software understands what it has to mask itself by. So now we have both our text coming in. And now what I want to do is I'll probably animate the lines. So that's a very simple animation. So I'll probably go into 1 second where all this animation ends, and maybe right before it, I'll go into my spoke lines and I'll press S on my keyboard to bring up my scale properties, create a stopwatch, and then probably go 10-15 frames ahead. And then I'll create another stopwatch. And then I'll go back to my first keyframe and I'll make the scale 0. So now these two things animate and then the lines come in. Okay, so while my lines are coming in, I want my text to start appearing as well. So for that, I'll go into my basic training layer, which is over here. So I'll take my basic training layer and get it above the spoke lines hider layer, and I'll drop it over here, and then I'll press S on the keyboard and press shift and press T. So now I have my scale and my opacity, S for scale, T for opacity, and then I'll create stopwatches for both of them and then go to the next keyframe and create 2 more keyframes. And now I'll go into my first one and I'll make the scale to be around 120 and I'll make the opacity to be 0. So it fades in from 120 to 100. So I think most of the things are already done. Now the only thing I want to do now is animate the stars. So once everything is done, so right about here, I think it's a good time for the stars to come in. So I'll go into my R star and L star and press S on my keyboard and press shift and press T, and I'll click on the stopwatch for scale and opacity, and then go a little bit ahead and press the keyframes again. And now I'll go back to my first set of keyframes and I'll make the scale to be 0 and I'll make the opacity to be 0. So now we have, yep. So first our text animates, and then the line with it, the dotted lines along with it, and then the text and the lines together, and finally the stars. So this is the entire animation for the sticker that we have. Now the last thing that we need to do is bring this composition into our basic training composition. So now we'll go into our project window and our badge is already over here. So now what we need to do is we need to drag and drop our badge from here to our basic training composition. And now it's a little too big and I don't want it to appear at the beginning. So I'll go into say around 2 seconds or slightly before 2 seconds when my building starts coming in, and I'll drag it and I'll press shift to make it start at that point. And I want to look at the scale and the rotation, so I'll press S and then press shift and press R to bring up my scale and rotation, and I click stopwatches for both of them, and then go to say around 6 seconds and then make 2 more keyframes over here. And then I'll go to my first one and I'll make it a rotation of say around 40 degrees and a scale of 0. Yeah, I think that seems good, but at the ending frame I think it's slightly too big, so I'll probably reduce this to 70. So I think that seems good. Okay, sure, that seems good. Okay, so now what we need to do is we want to add a radial wipe. So I'll go to my effects and presets and go to radial. I'll write down radial over here and drag and drop my radial wipe onto my badge. And I'll press the keyframe, I'll press the stopwatch for transition completion. And then I'll press U on my keyboard while my layer is selected to bring up all the keyframes. And I'll move forward a little bit, and right about here I would want my animation to get complete. So I'll make another keyframe over here, which is around 3 seconds. And then I'll go to my first one and I'll make it 100. So it goes from 100 to 0. Okay, that seems good. Okay, and now the last thing that we want to do is go into something called a light sweep. So I'll go to my effects and presets again and I'll go into CC light sweep and I'll drag and drop it over here. And now I'll go into around here. Okay, so maybe I don't want my, so I think right about over here I would want to end my rotation and scale, so I'll just drag it inside a little bit till around 5 seconds. And after this animation stops, maybe a few frames later, and right about here is where I want my light sweep to start acting. So my effect control shows me all the effects that are inside this layer. So I'll go to my light swipe, I'll click on the center and click and make a stopwatch. And what that does is, this is the line that's a light sweep. And I'll just drag my x-axis a little bit off the center, so it's outside. And I'll press U on my layer to bring up all. So if I press U once, it collapses. I'll press U again to bring up all my keyframes. And then I'll go a little bit into the timeline. And now I'll go into my x-axis again and I'll drag it to the other side. And now we have that cool light swipe. So now this is a little too small. So what I'll do is I'll increase the width a little bit, and thickness, I want a little bit of thickness, so I'll keep it at 7.2. And I think, yeah, I think that seems good enough to me. Yeah. So now the next thing that I want to do is, like, my animation is done, but I'm not very happy with how it looks. So I think the animation should probably start. So most of the things that we animated are not even visible. So I think my animation should start right about here. So at this point in the timeline, I'll just double click and go inside our badge. So I'll select all my layers, press U to collapse everything, press U again to bring up all the keyframes, and then I'll drag and select all of them, and don't move this line, okay? And we just drag all our keyframes to start right around here, little bit before the line. And now we'll go into a basic training again. Yeah, I think that looks much better. Okay, so now the last thing that I want to do is I want to select all of them and press F9 on my keyboard so that it smoothens out. And I'll go inside my badge and select all the keyframes over here, and I'll press F9 on the keyboard. And now let's go into a basic training and look at it again. Okay, now what I'm realizing is that maybe I want to use my scale and rotation to last till the end. Now let's watch it again. Yeah, I think that looks way better than what we had before. And now the last thing that I want to do is probably export this. So we did this in the last tutorial as well. So I'll press Ctrl Shift and the question mark key, and that brings up this render queue for me. And I can just go to my output module and click on this, and I can change the format from here. So I can probably go for a JPEG sequence, a PNG sequence, or whatever suits my current needs. So what suits best for me is the QuickTime settings. So I'll go to my QuickTime, and I think everything else seems good enough over here, and I don't need to change anything else. And I'll click on OK, and I'll go to basic training to see where it's getting saved. So it's inside T6 and the name's correct, and I'll save it over here, and then all I need to do is hit render. And yeah, I think it's done. Now I just need to go to a finder, and inside T6 I can find the file that we just exported, and I'll just open it up. And this is our file. And that brings us to the end of the tutorial series. I hope you guys were able to learn something from it. I'll create a playlist out of all the tutorials that were there and put it on YouTube and on my website as well. Also, a lot of time and effort went into making these tutorials, so it would mean a lot to me if you could like this video or subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you very soon.